All right, hello. Welcome to the second night of the Carson Scholars Lightning Talks. It's so nice to see everyone. Should we start? Yes, we'll start with the land acknowledgement. So we just want to take the time to respectfully acknowledge that the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. So a little bit about the Carson Scholars Program. As many of you probably know, we are a graduate fellowship for students whose work intersects with the environment in many, many disciplines. And the Carson Scholars, we train students in the art of science communication. So this slide has a couple of the people involved. Kevin Bonine is here tonight. He's the lead faculty mentor. I'm Hay Reamley, by the way. I'm also a faculty mentor, and I also want to acknowledge these wonderful people who have done so much to help put tonight's event on and other events. So Rachel Zollinger is here tonight. Ariana Solwell, who's the program coordinator, and Maya Schneider is also here tonight. So thank you so much to the people on the slide. Yeah, maybe a round of applause. And thank you also to our program supporters. Yes, so tonight we're going to hear from 6 of our Carson Scholars. They have worked so hard to create these presentations. So thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited for this. The first talk is actually going to be a pre-recorded speech or talk from one of our one of our scholars, Skylar, who was unable to be here tonight in person. So let's start that video now.
Good afternoon. My name is Skylar Benedict. I'm a PhD student in the School of Anthropology here at UA, and I study mangrove wetland conservation and restoration initiatives. For those of you who don't know, mangroves are a group of tree species that share a range of characteristics such as high salt tolerance and adaptations to living in saturated and often submerged soils, and they are easily identifiable through the delightfully tentacular roots you see up here. This particular wetland forest is one of many that live in my research site near Bahia de Quino, or Quino Bay, along the eastern coast of Mexico's Gulf of California. And as it happens, in addition to protecting shorelines from storms and sequestering carbon in coastal sediments, Quino's mangroves also provide essential nutrients for juvenile fish and commercially sought-after shrimp species. Now, I love shrimp, and I'm guessing many of you do too. I love it in pasta, I love it in tacos, and I especially love it when it comes artistically arranged around the rim of a cocktail glass. But the shrimp we love to eat comes from somewhere, and it needs to be situated accordingly. As it happens, a vast portion, over 25 million pounds of shrimp, makes its way every year from Mexican coastlines to US grocery stores and restaurants. Many of these Mexican shrimp are caught wild, but a vast number are grown in huge industrial shrimp farms, of which Sonora contains a staggering 39.7% of Mexico's total. And it is these same farms, like the ones pictured across from mangroves here, that directly threaten Quino's mangrove wetlands. Now, what do shrimp farms do exactly? Like other forms of both forests and wetlands, mangroves, like the ones you saw on the previous slide, support a vast diversity of life, which the expansion of Sonoran shrimp farms since the 1990s continues to disrupt. As you saw pictured before, shrimp farms require the rearrangement of large swaths of coastal space, triggering developers and farm owners to destroy large areas of mangrove wetland, like the ones pictured in this talk. In addition, in order to function, Shrimp farms must suck vast quantities of water from neighboring coastal ecosystems, disrupt the hydrology of coastal areas' sandy bottoms, and pump massive amounts of excess nutrients into neighboring waters. Now, this would be bad enough if their impacts were strictly ecological, but they also threaten Bahia de Quino's local fishing economy, which directly depends on those same mangrove wetlands to support and shelter the fish, crab, and shrimp essential to it. Fortunately, a binational network of ecologists, oyster farmers, educators, and fishers from Quino strive to care for and monitor these wetlands year-round. And for the last 10 years, they have worked constantly to marshal support from the Mexican government to enforce protections on mangrove wetlands to shield them from the impacts of shrimp farming. The Grupo Tortuguero de Bahia Quino, pictured here, is one such group. Made up of local fishermen who work to rescue and re-release sea turtles caught in fishing nets, they also play a key role in monitoring local mangrove wetlands and help to coordinate efforts to clean them, care for them, and work with ecologists in the area to collect the data necessary to get Mexican government support. So as an environmental anthropologist, how can I contribute? My job is to study the links between local organizations' work, large-scale conservation policies, and the health of ecosystems that are the target of conservation initiatives. To do this, I conduct interviews to learn about how Quino conservation groups frame the connections between their work, local ecosystems, and the threats of shrimp farming. I also use participant observation, a method by which I take opportunities to participate in their work in whatever way they find helpful, and I document how that work functions and what it is like to do it. And most of all, I try to embrace connections in whichever way I can. Connections between myself and my research collaborators, connections between them and the members of their communities, and connections between communities and ecosystems. The purpose of these methods is to meticulously document and amplify the importance of their work, how these groups' collaborative efforts to clean trash from the lagoon, enforce seasonal fishing bans, and petition the Mexican government authorities to enforce their wetlands status as a protected area support the ongoing health of mangrove wetland ecosystems through care for water quality and the ongoing presence and lives of mangrove wetlands themselves. So why do this work? I grew up near Shepherdstown, West Virginia, in a family of environmentalists and a community committed to the care of local ecosystems, not unlike Bahia de Quino, and the diversity of organizations and individuals working to conserve and expand local protected wetlands and forests. And while no one ever doubted the importance of community efforts to create and carry out conservation or to collect the data necessary to inform those efforts, much of the documentation of this work that was produced looked much like the map of Bahia de Quino and its mangrove forests pictured on this slide. It shows jurisdictions and protective boundaries, and it has its value, but ultimately it's an abstraction. It doesn't show the people whose work produces it. People like the scientists pictured here, collecting data on mangrove forest coverage and migratory bird populations along Sonora's coastline. This and many other forms of work that happen at the community level are not just important for conservation and the effective management of ecosystems, but absolutely indispensable. Sonora's conservation community leaders may not show up in our grocery store seafood aisles, just as the mangrove trees here do not. But beyond protecting their local ecosystems and communities, local organizations work to protect mangrove wetlands and drive towards sustainable use of coastlines does make the contents of those aisles possible. The work of communities and their connections to landscapes supports ecologies and economies at scales beyond their local one. Throughout my own work, I hope to make their efforts to balance the health of coastlines, fisheries, and communities visible and valuable through detailed written and visual documentation that they can use to progress their own conservation priorities. Thank you.
Sorry, Skylar isn't here in person and can't answer questions, but I do want to share that he took and passed his oral comprehensive exams on Monday of this week. So that's quite a hurdle, and congratulations to Skylar. Let's put up 5 and 6, if you would. I can do it. Thank you. So here's a preview of the rest of the talks, now in a slightly different order. Basically, Skylar went first instead of last. But next up, we'll have Alison, followed by Miguel, Kelly, Sam, and Anthony. And I just want to remind folks that this event is scheduled this week to be part of the Seas Earth Week events, right? And it is a very full week, lots of activity. We had 6 talks on Monday evening, and now another 6 this evening. And at some level, I think there's maybe too much scheduled this week, and people are getting a little bit over committed with respect to what they attend. But thank you all for being here. So why don't we get started with our live talks? And don't forget, there's food afterwards.
Hello. All right. My second year of graduate school in Tucson, it snowed in town, which was a big deal. It snowing a little bit in town meant it snowed a lot in the mountains, and there was snow on all 4 mountain ranges around the city. Oops. Okay. Where did? Okay. Sorry. Okay. So as the snow melted and came down into the washes, there was water flowing through the town that normally wouldn't have been there. And so one weekend evening, as I was driving through town with a friend, we crossed over the Rito River, and it was raging. As a former whitewater rafting guide, I was stoked. As soon as I got home, I called up my friend with whom I had hiking plans for the next day and said, dude, hear me out. I have better plans for us tomorrow. We should rent kayaks from the rec center and kayak down the Rito. He was in, and so we started making plans for the next day. It turns out you can't rent kayaks from the rec center, but you can rent a hard-shelled canoe. Not ideal, but good enough. And so we made our way down to the Rito and started our journey up the river. It was awesome. The entire day I had this huge smile on my face, and I just kept saying, I can't believe there's this much water in the Rito. I can't believe we're canoeing on the Rito. I wasn't the only person who was excited. As people passed us, cycling, running, and jogging on both sides of the river, they were cheering and shouting, cheering us on, and warning us about check dams coming up that we probably should walk around. It was a fantastic day. As we got out of the river and I was waiting by the canoe for my friend to get the car, people kept coming by and talking with me. They were sharing stories about how they remember the Rito when it used to have water in it more often and what it was like before it was channelized. They also shared about the flood in 1983 that wiped out all but one of the bridges across the Santa Cruz River, caused $250 million in damages, and killed a dozen people. This event also led to mandatory bank stabilization in order to continue development along the river. It was amazing to see how this opportunity to recreate on and spend time around the river created this renewed sense of community among strangers. I've never had that many random people come up and talk to me in Tucson before. The reality is, most cities in the US have some sort of river running nearby them. After all, that is likely the reason people settled there in the first place, in a time when people were much more aware of where their water came from and why it is so crucial for survival. But after decades of being used to generate power for factories and as systems for waste disposal, followed by the later construction of walls for flood control, separating communities from their rivers, they became forgotten, unsightly, polluted waterways, not fit for recreation or consumption, and around which no one wanted to live or spend time if they had any other choice. The burning of the heavily polluted Cuyahoga River in 1969 in Cleveland marked a shift in attitudes towards the use of rivers as industrial waste dumps. Although the river had burned many times before, a Time magazine article in 1970 about the event brought greater attention to the issue and coincided with the founding of the US Environmental Protection Agency. People at all levels of government, the media, and many private individuals found it easy to get around the shared goal of cleaning up a river filthy enough to catch on fire and started calling for environmental regulation. But before you get too depressed, here is a picture of the Cuyahoga River today, after 50 years of restoration efforts. It still has lingering issues from its dark past, but it has come a long way. In fact, in 2000, the nearby Cuyahoga Valley became one of our nation's newest national parks. Water is a shared resource, which means it is also a shared problem. What is cool about river restoration is that it is a very personal and local issue that is present on a national and actually on a global scale, although my research focuses specifically on the US. With so many river restoration projects happening in different cities across the US, it seems like there could be a lot that we can learn from each other, both between cities and within partnerships. Everyone in the city, whether they know it or not, has an interest and a buy-in with these projects. As a geographer, I am interested in questions of place and how people connect to and interact with their environment. In recent years, people are recognizing the value of restoring urban rivers for recreation, health, community building, wildlife habitat restoration, and economic development. Though the top priority may differ between groups and individuals, we can all agree that we do not want our rivers on fire, and taking better care of urban rivers contributes to all of these priorities. And that is where the Urban Waters Federal Partnership comes in. The Urban Waters Federal Partnership was started in 2011 by the US Environmental Protection Agency with the goal of restoring urban waters and reconnecting urban communities with their waterways. With 20 designated partnership locations across the United States and Puerto Rico, including the newest one on the Salt River in Phoenix, each partnership faces unique social, environmental, and economic challenges and is a unique combination of 15 federal agencies along with numerous other non-governmental organizations, local governments, and private sector actors. Common partnership activities include litter cleanup, water quality monitoring and education, community meetings and surveys about desired river use, and the creation of more park space and multi-use trails. My goal as a researcher is to study each of these partnerships in order to better understand the factors that contribute to success in partnerships around urban river restoration, how the diversity of folks involved in these projects helps or hinders their success, what motivates involvement, and how we can do better. As a lover of the outdoors and an avid outdoor recreation enthusiast, I know what a blessing it is for me and my personal physical and mental health to be able to spend time in nature and in the mountains. I'm also very blessed to have a car to get myself easily to those places. The beauty of urban river restoration is its accessibility. You don't have to have a car or a lot of money or even a lot of time. Through cycling or walking or public transportation, people of all socioeconomic statuses can access these green spaces, and you don't even need an entire day to make it happen. My hope is that ultimately, more people can have a perspective-changing experience on a river just like I did, canoeing on the Rito. My name is Alison Elder, and I'm a PhD student in the School of Geography, Development, and Environment. Thank you.
All right. When I say Sonoran Desert, many people think immediately in something like this. A very arid landscape, high temperatures, little water, saltwaters here, rocks over there, and animals like scorpions, tarantulas, and snakes. And yeah, that's part of the Sonoran Desert. But there is more than that. Actually, the Sonoran Desert is the most biodiverse desert in the entire world. And there are very special animals that we can find only here. Animals like the Sonoran pronghorn. The Sonoran pronghorn is a large herbivore that has been adapted to live here. And yes, I know we have pronghorn all over North America, but this one has been adapted to the arid conditions of the desert. It has hairs of the color of the sand. It has horns that look like forks to defend themselves. They have very slender legs that help them run very fast. And this is actually the second fastest animal on Earth and the first one in North America. It runs fast to escape from predators, but also to go to other places that are very far from where they are, to look for food, to look for resources. And you know, in this place, there is almost no water, so they have to get the water from the fruits of the cholla, the cactus of the desert. So that's a good way to evolve in this area. So we can find this Sonoran pronghorn in Arizona and Sonora, in the southern part of Sonora that is connected to the northern part of Sonora. In this grid patch is the range of the Sonoran pronghorn, but my study is in the red polygon. That's the Pinacate Biosphere Reserve. In this place, we have about 100 individuals living in the wild. In the rest of the range, there are about 1,000 Sonoran pronghorn. But you know, this species is considered endangered because of the fragmentation of the habitat. We have fences, we have barriers, we have roads, we have highways that have been developed, and that's affecting the movement of the pronghorn. They cannot freely move anywhere outside of the reserve anymore. Imagine being a pronghorn out there in the desert, in a place that used to be all natural in the past, and now you can see how from where they are, you can already see human development. You can see the vehicles in the back, we can see barriers, and it's hard to get to the other side of the same valley. So that's what I get in the story. My name is Miguel Grageda. I'm a graduate student in the Department of Natural Resources here at the University of Arizona. And I was interested in learning more about what was going on there. So I deployed more than 100 cameras out there in the desert. I had to walk kilometers and kilometers deploying these cameras that take a photo every time a pronghorn or another animal passes in front of it. With that photo, I can have a date, time, location, temperature. So it's very useful to use this technique. It's pretty much like having 100 of biologists working 24/7 and for a very reduced amount of money. So after 2 or 3 years of effort, I finally come out with a database with locations, hundreds of locations of pronghorn in this area. And that's been very useful. Why? I will show you why. I took all this data and I combined with spatial layers of the reserve, layers like topography, type of vegetation, the greenness, soils, elevation, slope, and all these characteristics, I had to combine them all together, extract the information of each one of the locations, and finally, I was able to get a model, a habitat model. So basically, what it means is that I was able to predict where the pronghorn will be in the reserve, in the Pinacate. So as you can see some green patches. That's the good habitat for the pronghorn. The red patches are places not that good for them because there is almost no vegetation. The soil is not that good. So we will rarely find a pronghorn there. So if you don't understand very well how this model works, well, I overlapped on a real map, and you can see how in the middle of the reserve there is a mountain that's a volcano, and the model helped me to predict that right there, we won't find pronghorn, but they are pretty much around the volcano. So that helps the Pinacate to protect that area and the northern part of the reserve. So that's very good for management purposes. Then using that same model, I was able to predict the connectivity. So pretty much how much will it take for a pronghorn to cross from one side to the other of the reserve. So this model has to go pixel by pixel, counting how much it will take and find the best path to travel from one side to the other. So you can see here the red color is the best way how a pronghorn can move. But then I overlap human activities like agriculture, fences, and roads, and surprise, they are exactly in the middle of the corridor. As you can see there, the northern part, there is a highway and crosses right in the middle. So it will be a very effective barrier for them. So the idea of all this information is to help the pronghorn to move back and forth again, to connect this area and help them to go and pretty much visit their cousins in other parts of the pronghorn range. So yeah, that's my dream. That's the idea of these results, to be able to help develop these bridges and passes for wildlife that not only benefit the pronghorn, but other animals that live in the Sonoran Desert. And that way, help to conserve the biodiversity. I want to thank you all so much for being here, and I want to thank Carson program for the opportunity and the great experience that I had this year. So thank you very much.
That's it, correct?
Good evening. I'd like to start with what might seem to be a strange question. What comes to your mind when you hear the word knot? Is it a jumble of shoelaces tied all together? It's so difficult that you can't get it untied? Is it a piece of macrame that's hanging from the ceiling and holding a precious potted plant of yours in your house? As an environmental educator, there are two things that come to mind when I hear the word knot. The first is the knot that's formed by all the interrelationships that happen out in the world that we explore. And the second is knot that's formed by a tree that has lost its limb. It's the evidence of something that used to be there, but no longer was. As an educator of over 20 years, taking students anywhere from kindergarten to college seniors out to explore the world around them, I've seen the sense of wonder and discovery that comes about by exploring these knots in nature while being actually out there in nature. And the sense of passion that it can instill in the students as they explore. But many times these knots are hidden, and it's because someone like me was there to point out something like the gall from a goldenrod, a stem that is swollen and protecting the larva of a gall fly. And that's the way it is with environmental issues many times. They are hidden either physically, like the loss of local animal life, or they are hidden by the amount of time it takes or the sheer scale of what's happening, like the change in global surface temperatures. And this means that people are not able to see how it affects them personally or the ecosystem around them. And that made me wonder, how can we explore these knots in nature if there's someone not there to guide us? How can we explore and reveal the relationships and environmental issues that are in an area where they occur? As a doctoral candidate in the College of Education, I got inspiration from what might seem an unlikely source: Pokemon Go. Now, stay with me on this. Think about when this augmented reality game first came out. There were headlines talking about how people go out to the places that they've never been before in order to capture a Pokemon in the place where it lives. And augmented reality has a lot of other different advantages going for it too. There's no special equipment that's needed beyond, there's no goggles or a wand or anything like that. All you need is your smartphone and the right app loaded to it. And then you can take it out into the field and use it as a window to explore the world around you. By overlaying images and by giving information in place in that just-in-time manner, and by collecting artifacts such as pictures and videos and written reflections, augmented reality might be a way to make these knots in nature that are hard to see easier to see and reveal them. My current study is taking place at the Painted Hill Trailhead, which is about 15 minutes that way down the road. In it, participants take part in a augmented reality trail experience that I have created using an app and a studio suite called Metaverse, which is not connected to Facebook in any way. I have 10 different activity stops along the way that are anchored to GPS coordinates and plants at those GPS coordinates. And participants can visit these spots in any way that they want, any amount and in any order, because play and choice is very much part of the augmented reality experience. At each of these spots, digital javelina is a guide to help them explore the plants, animals, history, landscape, whatever is being focused in on that place. And the javelina also prompts them to gather those same sort of artifacts that I talked about, the photos, the written reflections, and the videos. And these are all stored within the experience, because when the next people come through, they can look at them and see what the people before them have seen, learn from another point of view, discover something they might not have seen just because a picture was taken at another point of the year. That, combined with the javelina giving information on what's being explored and the ability to visit websites and videos along the way to delve deeper into the subjects that are happening, it can lead to that sense of wonder and that sense of discovery, and also maybe a deeper connection to what's being explored. As part of my research, I also am using video spy glasses that the participants can wear if they would like to, and that lets me see what they're looking at as they're going along, and record any conversations that are happening as well, just in case they are forgotten later on. It helps make a more rounded picture of the experience and the engagement that is happening. After the experience, I hold interviews or focus group discussions where we talk about the types of interactions that happen, the connections and discoveries that are being made, and the overall impact that they feel that the augmented reality had on their experience out in there. I combine transcripts of this along with the digital artifacts that have been collected by the participants in order to construct themes that try to summarize what kind of engagement, what kind of connection, and how these knots in nature are being explored through the augmented reality experience. Right now, there's 3 emergent themes that have been coming up. The first is there's definitely this idea of new engagements happening in this liminal space where you have both the digital and embodied experience. Part of that's kind of seen in the second theme, which is like a close reading of a place where people are slowing down, taking their time, and interacting with nature in a way they may not have done before without the experience. There's also the theme of choice, both the perception of choice they have going into the experience and the choices they make throughout on which spots to go and what to explore. My name is Kelly Smith, and I explore how augmented reality can be used to spark wonder and discovery in the local environment, to really explore those knots in nature that lead to a passion for the local environment because we wanted to protect what we are passionate about. Thank you. And if you want to try it out, you can do that sometime too.
So it's this one. Hi, can everybody hear me okay? All right, well, I'm Sam, and today I'm going to be discussing corals and their building blocks to resilience. So I imagine when I said coral, the first thing that many of you thought of was Finding Nemo. And this isn't a bad first thought. Our real coral reefs are very similar to what you see in Finding Nemo. They're vibrant, they're filled with life, and so many colors and so many animals. But unfortunately, not all of our reefs are like this. Many of the reefs around the world are dying due to anthropogenic climate change. Corals evolved in the tropics, where they're used to very stable temperatures. For millions of years, they've lived in this nice, comfortable bathwater, and now humans are turning up the heat, which means that over the course of less than a year, you can go from a living reef to a dying reef to a dead one in just less than a year. And you might be thinking, but these things look like rocks. Well, you're partially right, but corals are living animals that are experiencing these environments. And I like to think of corals a lot like Pokemon. I know we just heard about Pokemon, but bear with me. So similar to Tentacruel, our corals are going to have, they're closely related to jellyfish, which are indicative by these tentacles that you can see here on this juvenile coral. And this coral is about the size of a nickel. And it can start from just the size of the tip of your pencil, and some species can grow to be taller and longer than myself. But another Pokemon type we can think of with these corals is, as you thought they may have appeared, they look a lot like rocks, and that's because they also kind of are a rock. They build skeletons out of concrete, calcium carbonate to be specific, and that is what's physically creating the reefs that we can know and love. And finally, what gives them the energy to create these skeletons that provide this complex habitat for so many other species are that they also are a little bit like grass. And that's because they have microscopic algae that live inside of their tissues. And not only does it give them these beautiful colors, but it also provides them energy because these algae can photosynthesize just like plants do, and they share that energy with the coral. And coral have a lot of different microscopic partners. In addition to the algae, they also have a complex microbial microbiome. Just like you have a lot of microbes that live on your skin and inside your gut that provide a lot of functions. And these algae and these bacteria live in a very close mutualistic relationship with this coral and have allowed it to persist in what is otherwise nutrient-poor water for millions of years by sharing that energy with the coral, and the coral providing a nice stable home for these partners. And these can have a lot of different roles for the corals. For instance, there's some symbionts, some of these partners that might be a little bit more heat tolerant. And same goes for the bacteria, and even different individuals of coral may have different abilities to cope with different stressors such as heat. Others are going to be a little bit better maybe at producing food and sharing that nutrients with the coral to allow it to grow quicker or larger. And then finally, there's going to be some combinations of partners that actually might have a negative effect on the coral. They could be more pathogenic and take advantage of the kindness of their host. But all this gets even more complicated because in ecology, we love to say that everything depends. Everything tends to be context dependent. So in some instances, the same combination of partners that might help this coral be happy and healthy in a different environment, maybe a hot one, they could become pathogenic and start to harm the coral. And because of that, not only these differences in environment, the differences of who that coral can be related with, in a partnership with, but even just differences between individuals, we see a ton of variability when it comes to stress events. So if we take a look at this reef, we see some corals that are perfectly healthy, like over here. We see some that are white because they've lost that algae, which means they're going to be on their way to dying because they're not receiving those nutrients. And then up towards the top, we can see some that are dying. So this can already lead to a lot of different questions, but most importantly, because of the importance of coral reefs for providing a home to all these animals, the most important question is, how can we help corals and their partners get used to this heat event? And an incredible place to study this is at the biosphere too, because where most people have to do their experiments in just small tanks and maybe test a handful of corals, at the biosphere too, we also have a miniature ocean that we can use to test these questions at a more realistic scale. So rather than just a couple of corals, we can test this on a small coral reef and start to understand how these dynamics not only affect the coral and its partners, but the entire reef community. So one of the things that we're doing to try and see if corals can be made to be more heat tolerant is giving them a small baby heat stress event and seeing not only how those community partners that they're relating with change, but what is happening on the genetic level. What happens when they experience this heat stress, with the idea that if we repeat that heat stress now occurring in the ocean, so we can get a sense of this at scale, how are they going to respond this time? When at the genetic level, they've kind of already experienced this before. Is it going to be different? If you think about someone who's lived in Tucson their whole life, they're probably going to handle our summer heat a little bit better than someone who freshly moved from Alaska. And similarly, someone who moved here from Alaska 5 years ago might be doing better than their friend who just got here last week. And so that's what we're hoping to see with these coral, is to start to have this kind of acclimatization process of starting to be able to tolerate this heat and understanding what genetic pathways could allow them to do that so that we can start to help make all of corals more heat tolerant. And finally, because we're able to do this at this ecosystem level scale, during this whole process, we can also monitor what's happening in the whole reef system. And so the biosphere ocean has predominantly been dominated by macro algae rather than coral. So as it transitions to become coral dominated, we want to see what the water community is going to be doing during this process. So when the macroalgae is there, they basically produce fast food for the microbes and the viruses that naturally live in the water, which creates this dynamic of a very unhealthy bacteria and viral community that tend to be more pathogenic. And so we hope as we transition to be more coral, that we'll see a similar transition in this microbial community as these corals feed a more nutritious, well-rounded meal to the water environment, and that those microbes will then recycle that back to the corals, leading to this more healthy feedback loop than we see on an unhealthy reef. So thanks for listening. That's all I have today about how we're trying to save corals from the desert. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for all waiting for the last talk. And I'm going to bring us back onto land now. And I'm going to be talking about some of the biological world around the urban world around us. Now, I want to transport you guys quickly to a city that looks like this. This is a picture of Los Angeles, where I am from originally. As you look at this picture, you might be able to see certain things, the bustling lights, the traffic. You might be able to picture some of the sound around you, the traffic again, which I had to deal with a lot. But as you look around the city as a whole, you might be able to identify a few characteristics about them. And one of these interesting things you might see are these individual murals around the city. These murals are not just for any ordinary mountain lion, they are for a local celebrity found within the area, P22. Now, if you hadn't heard about this mountain lion before, it has become a Los Angeles icon, not only being able to traverse through multiple freeways in a densely populated area, but also surviving multiple years in harmony within the city of Los Angeles. P22 unfortunately died of last year at 12 years old. And even though P22 was an icon not only for mountain lion conservation, it also got people to start to understand the role of urban biodiversity around us. Now, P22 is not the only plant or animal around us. There's a myriad of different organisms that we see day to day within the city. Some were brought here by accident. Some were brought here as pets. Some might have just been here all along and just been able to coexist in the cities. And the goal of, as we notice that these plants and animals begin to populate these urban areas with us, is how do these organisms change within urban environments as a whole? And that is how the field of urban ecology and urban evolutionary biology began to develop. While these fields are also dedicated to understand the concepts of ecology and evolution by using urban environments almost just as a laboratory, they're also very dedicated to understand where these animals are going to be living within these urban environments, how are they changing physically, and how are they changing genetically. And I kind of want to give you an example of how this is done. So normally, if we take these two different environments, the left being urban and the right being a more natural, pristine environment, these are both from Los Angeles, by the way. A researcher might want to compare how an organism found within both environments is different from each other. For instance, they might take a local bird and then take physical characteristics or genetic characteristics and then compare them to one another in order to see how this urban environment is changing the biology of this organism. Now, as we see with this natural environment, we see lots of mountains. There are some plains here, some chaparral area. This natural environment is not just a natural environment. It is a myriad of mosaic elements. And we're going to be finding this within our urban environments as well, because urban environments are not just concrete. If I were to zoom into the city, we might still see concrete, a lot of different geographical features around here, but we're also going to be noticing the changing climate around us. There are also a few unfortunate things that we might notice in the city, such as pollution. And then finally, the historical history of the city, such as historic redlining, defines the outlook and the construction of this city. And it ultimately makes us wonder, how do we better define urban ecosystems? Because they are in fact not concrete. They're living, breathing, changing environments that have been brought here most recently in time. And this is where I come in as a researcher. So, using a framework created by some of my collaborates within the field of biology at the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History, we are trying to better define urbanization, not just through concrete, but the variables that will also be found within urbanization as a whole. And the way that this is done is that we take a geographic location, such as the state of California. We then want to look at a certain spatial area, such as government-made census tracts, and there we collect certain variables from them. It could be anything from pollution data, socioeconomic data, climate data, and land cover data. And then from there, we would organize this based on dissimilarities and similarities between these different geographical areas until we get a product that looks something like this. These different colors represent different areas in California, which are defined based on their different socioeconomics, climate, land cover, and pollution. And these will hopefully be able to show us how we can better define urbanization as a whole, because all 4 of these factors have also been shown to readily affect biodiversity around us. Now, this is only the first step of my PhD. From here, I will also want to look at how we can apply this framework to physical responses in organisms, genetic responses in organisms, and finally plot out where they might live throughout the course of their history. And that is something that I'm currently doing at this moment. The whole purpose to better understand and better define urbanization is that hopefully we can offer solutions to areas that might be either more socially economic disadvantage, higher pollution rates, and other factors that might be leading to loss of biodiversity. And then offer remedies in which case that we can better accommodate these areas, whether it is including land bridges, employing government agencies, reducing urban heat island effect through plants, and creating more green spaces across urban areas. I wanted to end this presentation to kind of just talk about how urban ecosystems aren't going anywhere anytime soon. They are going to be continuing to grow as we as a society continue, and the biodiversity around them is not going anywhere anytime soon. However, a lot of this biodiversity is still under threat due to this urbanization, and we, not only as a society, but as people, should be engaged and knowing that these organisms around us are here to stay. Because if we do that, not only are we able to implement stuff that can continue this diverse biodiversity around us, we can also see organisms like P22 continue to thrive throughout the rest of our history. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Those were fabulous talks. And we have time for questions. Are there any questions from the audience or from our Carson scholars to each other?
Hi, can you all hear me? Thank you all so much for your talk. My question is for Anthony. How does socioeconomic factor affect urban biodiversity?
Thank you so much for your question. That's a really wonderful thought. One of the ways that can be most notably, especially with socioeconomics, is the areas of green space that we can find in urban environments. For instance, it's been notably seen that areas that have higher socioeconomic advantage will have more native plants, more vegetation. This will lead also to areas being less hot because the vegetation will be able to absorb the heat around it. So basically making spots that are more suitable for organisms to live in it. Another way also that can kind of tie into pollution as well is that areas that have generally low socioeconomic status are more closely geographically related to areas that have higher pollution rates as well. And this in turn can affect the biodiversity around it.
Other questions? Katrina, you look like you have a question. Thank you.
Now, tell me your name again, sir. Yeah. Is that Miguel? I really enjoyed your talk, and one of the things that I noticed in your picture of a camera was that it was attached to a cholla, which makes sense since the pronghorn used those. But that seems like an epic challenge for a field researcher to handle attaching things to cholla. And I was just curious about what that was like to deploy that kind of scale of camera traps in that kind of environment. And did you really attach all those to cholla?
Yeah, well, I have tried in different plants. I tried in saguaros and I tried in Palo Verde. Pretty much I use whatever is there. Sometimes it doesn't work. Like now I try not to use saguaros, but chollas work well because the plant is strong enough to handle it. And one of the reasons why I do that is because sometimes if people see the cameras, they will steal it. And it makes harder for them to find it if it's there. In some areas I use a metal pole and that works just fine, but also it's more noticeable. But yeah, it's challenging to use chollas because sometimes you get you get the how do you call them, spikes, but it has worked good so far. And something I do is try to not mess too much with the plant to avoid damaging it, but it has been good so far.
I have a question for Kelly. You said that your app and your trail and all that cool stuff is located in Painted Hills, the Painted Hills trailhead area. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts or plans about expanding it to other parts of Tucson, if it's located or if it's isolated to just one particular trail within the Painted Hills. What's the future?
Well, right now it's at the Mosaic Trail that's on the Painted Hills trailhead, and there'll be that for this study. But obviously, I'd love to, take it to different environments too. Go out to different national parks and see if we can make some trails along there and that type of thing. I can see it. And really, what I'd really like to do is eventually do more of a youth participatory action research project with it, where the youth are making the trail and helping see what the issues are and learning and connecting to the land through that way as well. Thanks for the question.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for those wonderful presentations. And actually, this question is for any of the presenters, and it's more about the program. What was the most challenging part of the Carson program?
The lightning talk. No.
Well, I guess, thanks for the question. I guess everyone has a different answer. For me, it's like having this kind of, not experiences, not challenging, but good experience to be exposed to a public and trying to give a message in a certain amount of time, at the same time keeping our research in a very basic way so everybody can understand it. Because as you can see, everyone has a very different topic, and I think we could understand what each one of us were doing. So I think that's the challenging part, just try to pass a message and to be prepared and improve our skills on talking to the public. Anybody else?
Yeah, just to kind of echo some of that, I agree. I think one of the hardest things about these kind of talks is that you want to make sure to be able to say what you want to say in terms of a lot of research that you've done, but a lot of that's very hard to translate in within a 7-minute talk, especially in terms of the background information, whether it's showing maps, showing historical data, showing organisms that might be a little bit more unusual. But I think that challenge is ultimately the core of what we as scientists are trying to do at this point, and to be able to communicate it not only in a way that makes sense to people who do research like this, but also in those who are interested to know more about this.
Other questions? All right. Well, how about a round of applause again for our 6 presenters? And thank you all for being here. Please do take the opportunity to talk with them one-on-one. We have food and music outside. The weather is beautiful. So we look forward to spending a little time with you in a relaxing setting. Thanks so much.